One of the most common elements that we've seen in animation in the last decade has been the idea of accepting people for what they are. The themes that you don't have to be like everyone else, that you can be your own person and be celebrated, has been the core of many of these shows and movies. Whether it's exploring a young boy being allowed to have more feminine traits, or even allowing a bisexual girl to fall in love, animation has been allowed to embrace letting these characters be more, to show the audience that being different isn't scary or wrong. And there are few movies that really show this better than the recently released Nimona. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. Unlike a lot of people that have been eagerly awaiting this movie, I actually didn't know about Nimona until about a week or two before its release, when one of the artists I follow on Twitter, or is it X now, posted the trailer to the film for a wild, rambunctious girl capable of transformation and bent on causing chaos, destruction, and overall just seemingly enjoying to be the bad guy. It interested me enough to check out the film, and after learning about the history of Nimona, there's a lot here I'm wanting to talk about. Fair warning, I will be going through the entire plot here, so spoilers. The story starts proper with us getting the classical storybook opening, though it's told through a scroll this time. It details how there was a dark monster that was taken down by Glorith, a blonde warrior woman who was so revered that she's treated as a near deity in the modern day of the story, some 1,000 years after the fact. Many things, such as the slaying of monsters, the fear of the outside world, and proper bloodlines for the knights that defend the kingdom, all originate from Glorith and her actions. This is where we run into the first major conflict of the movie, as in the fashion of our own modern-day over-the-top news programming, we learn that one of the major characters that we'll be following, Ballastar, isn't of knightly blood. He is a commoner that the queen of the city saw potential in, and her majesty was wanting to set a new precedent that anyone who was willing to work hard could pick up the sword and become a knight. We also get introduced to Ambrosius Goldenloin, a name and a half if there ever was one, who we find out is Ballastar's lover. And that's one of my favorite aspects of the movie, the fact that our main male lead is one half of a gay couple, and the movie never even blinks at it. In fact, throughout the entire film, no one ever has trouble with Ballastar being gay. It comes from either his common blood or the conflict of the movie, where he's framed for killing the queen when his sword turns into a laser. One of the best aspects of this film really is the complete and total normalization of a gay relationship, showing how it works just like a straight one for the audience. The fact that it helps contribute to the film's overall message, as we see in the end, is just a bonus. After losing an arm and now being branded a criminal, Ballastar makes a new robot limb while trying to figure out just what happened to him and who set him up. While hidden away, he meets up with our title character, Nimona. Initially thinking him a villain, Nimona does her best to convince him to let her be his sidekick, so that they can go about and do all the destruction and chaos she's been dreaming of. Disappointment is had when she finds out he's both innocent and not willing to hurt most people, but she's constantly trying to encourage him to just embrace being the bad guy. Trying to prove that he isn't the villain, Ballastar returns to the Institute and gets thrown into a cell for his trouble. He talks to the director, who's basically a cross between a religious priest and a life coach for the knights. He tries to plead innocence, but she turns him down at every point. The reason I'm focusing on this is because, despite her not really being a major part of the film at this point, the character animation and voice acting are so on point that you can feel the hurt in the character.
I trusted you. The Queen believed in you.
Like, ow, way to really make a guy feel bad even though he didn't do anything. It's about this point that we really start to get to see some of the themes of the film coming in full force, as right before breaking him out of his cell, Nimona talks about how people only see you one way, no matter how hard you try. She quickly brushes this off with her humor and transforming antics that we see in the action scene later, but there's just enough emotion here that it becomes obvious that there's more than she lets on. The main core from the movie from this point onward is focusing on proving Battlestar's innocence, while also showing him bonding with Nimona. What really gives the film its strength, though, is the constant emphasis on the society of the city and their treatment of Nimona and Ballister both. The entire city has been so obsessed with hunting monsters and slaying them ever since Glor's actions 1,000 years ago. From their advertisements to their news to the knights themselves, there is no argument, no other way of viewing things. Anything that's different isn't wanted or trusted, be it something that could be viewed as a monster like Nimona, or a commoner like Ballistar. The one holdout that Ballistar has throughout the film is that his lover Ambrosius is willing to see past that, to believe that he isn't the killer. However, even knowing the killer's identity in the director, which makes me want to congratulate the voice acting in that earlier scene even more, Ambrosius here is too deep in the system of the kingdom. With what evidence Ballister had being destroyed and seeing Nimona's eyes glow in a very inhuman manner, he commands the knights to arrest them. It's only after a rather fun fight and some drama between our two male leads that we get a bit into Nimona's own history here. While we did get a possible peek into her backstory earlier on in the film, it was written off as a joke. Here, instead we see her protecting a kid, and then shifting into one herself, even younger than how she normally portrays herself. While we won't know the reason for it until later, this is where we get to see past Nimona's personality, pointing out how the Institute is calling her the monster when they're teaching everyone else to fear and attack anything that's different. And then we get this really heavy line.
I don't know what's scarier. The fact that everyone in this kingdom wants to run a sword through my heart. Or that sometimes I just want to let them.
So, I've summarized past some of the elements of Nimona's character up to this point because I felt like this clip needed to be seen first, because there are things about our shapeshifter that people might not get on the first watch through. At different points throughout the movie, when asked what she is, Nimona simply replied with just her name, calling any explanation for what exactly she was being small-minded. It didn't matter if she transforms or what she looks like. She's Nimona. That's all she has to be, and no one should have to tell her any differently. As a message, we've seen it before, of allowing someone to be who they are. In fact, another movie ages ago used a very similar question when talking about the characters who were different.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
Can you please just be normal for a second?
Normal?
I bring up these moments because they're similar in tone, even if they're alluding to something different. In this scene from the second X-Men movie, it's made to be an allegory to being gay, as the characters are being asked to cut off huge parts of themselves to simply not be mutants. They also face laws being made about them, the government restricting their rights, and certain people being fearful around them just for what they are. Nimona, in a very similar respect, poses this same question, but the meaning here is different. Throughout the film, whenever asked about how she got her powers or what she is, Nimona answers the same way.
I'm Nimona.
But as we get to know her a bit more, we learn that for Nimona, that sticking in one form makes her feel terrible, like her insides are itchy, described as the sensation right before a sneeze.
Then I shapeshift, and I'm free.
Like how the X-Men's moments can be seen as an allegory to being gay, this moment here and the story of Nimona as a whole can be the same for being transsexual or gender fluid. From the very start, we can see Nimona shifting her form to just about anything regardless of gender, age, or even reality. And yet that freedom she has is looked down upon by the rest of society as something to be feared, to be destroyed. This is something that becomes even more clear when we'll talk about the creator of Nimona later on. After this scene, Battlestar and Nimona use her transformation skills to trick a confession out of the director, using their own version of YouTube to expose the secret. This and finding Battlestar's sword in her office is enough to convince Ambrosius to arrest her at first, until the director finds an old scroll revealing a bit more of their history. Namely, the monster that Glora fended off all those years ago was Nimona herself. When Ambrosius meets Battlestar and brings this up, Battlestar is confused and hurt, reverting to the way he was trained to because in the heat of the moment, he thinks that he was tricked by the same monster that had caused their way of life in the first place. Having the one person she thought had seen past all that turn on her, Nimona escapes, and this is where we finally get to see the rest of her history. Though we still don't get an explanation about her powers or where exactly she comes from, Nimona has been looking for a place to belong for years, shifting her form to try and find a friend. Eventually, she found a young girl in a village, becoming friends with her and even sharing her transformation ability. All was good until the parents and the rest of the village saw her as a bear, freaking out when she turned back into a kid. Them attacking her caused the village to burn, and Nimona's friend, who turned out to be Glorith, blamed her for the destruction caused. Consumed with despair of losing another friend, Nimona lets it consume her. And this results in...
No!
Yeah, Nimona's gone kaiju on us, and there's little, if anything, that can stop her. The knights of the city go out to attack her, firing all sorts of weapons. And this is where we see that most of the damage being done isn't from Nimona, it's from the humans. While Nimona does destroy a few things here and there, mostly by just stepping on them, the rampant fires and widespread destruction is entirely on the knights and them panicking, just like what happened with Glorith all those years ago. Things aren't made any better when the director turns the cannons that have been pointed out into the wilderness towards the city, willing to fire them on the monster regardless of the civilians nearby. Ambrosius takes it kind of well.
What are we doing? Are we the baddies?
Eventually, it comes up to Nimona standing before the statue of Glorith, bearing her heart to it. You know what she's about to do. It's moments before the plunge when...
I'm sorry. I see you, Nimona, and you're not alone.
Of course, with what time we've got left, conflict is still needed. The director still deems Nimona a monster, blasting away the knight so she can get to the cannon herself, ready to fire it on the kingdom. Knowing that countless lives will be lost, Nimona transforms into another giant kaiju, flying right into the weapon just as it fires. The blast clears, leaving us without Nimona or the director, and the wall is torn down, showing a serene landscape in its place. The epilogue of the movie has the kingdom freely leaving and entering the city, while also dismantling the cannons. Throughout the city itself, we see tributes to Battlestar and Nimona both, with an entire area of the city being dedicated to her as a memorial, even some of the minor characters playing tribute. Battlestar ends the movie with him fixing up the hideaway that they have been at for the entire movie, before hearing a knock at the door.
Hey, boss.
Holy
As a movie, Nimona is actually pretty damn solid, with some moments of representation that I feel are going to help push forward normalizing not just same-sex couples in animation, but also might encourage more interesting protagonists that aren't always going to be the entire focus. But now comes perhaps the most interesting part of Nimona as a whole, despite me talking about the entire film, and that's its history. Nimona started life as a webcomic created by N.D. Stevenson. During his second year at college, Stevenson was tasked to create a brand new character. One of the reasons for Nimona's design would come from the idea of cosplay and wanting to have a costume that people who weren't into being busty or sensual might want to dress up as. Eventually, the idea would grow into the comic that would later be posted on Tumblr. After the webcomic ended 2 years later, HarperCollins, one of the big 5 book publishing companies, compiled the entire comic into a graphic novel. The popularity of the novel ended up not only getting the series translated into several different languages, but also an audiobook, and eventually would gain the attention of 20th Century Fox, who would buy the rights to Nimona for a film release. This starts the crazy journey of Nimona from the page to the silver screen, as the film would be in development for about 4 years, being given to Blue Sky Studios, and was originally going to be released in 2020. It was in the middle of this production, though, that the Disney company bought everything from Fox's movie division, and that included the rights to Nimona. Folks familiar with how Disney does things can probably predict how this goes. As much as the House of Mouse promotes that they're accepting of gay themes and the like, when it comes to actually putting that stuff into their films and animation, chances are things are going to be wonky, like what we saw with the Owl House. And as you've seen in this episode, Nimona kind of pushes things even further. While initially stating that the movie was going to go live sometime in 2021, the film was cancelled when Disney shut down Blue Sky Studios. Eventually, Annapurna Studio would gain the rights to the film, retaining several key figures from the Blue Sky team and a lot of the original animation work, eventually landing it on Netflix today. It's actually quite fitting the amount of hands that this film has changed to, and how, in a way, it goes along with the themes of the movie and of its creator, as N.D. Stevenson himself had transitioned during the film's development, and even stated that the original webcomic and the movie's development both helped them in finding out just who he is. It makes the moments in the film that represent those who are trans or might think they're trans all the stronger. It's encouraging them not to be afraid, to know that there are people who will stand by them, and that once they change, they're free. Overall, Nimona is a movie about change and about continuing to try even when all else is against you. The characters, creator, and even the very film itself has had to grow, change, and fight to have a right to exist as they are, no holds barred. It brings forth the hope and the dream that one day people wouldn't be seen as monsters just for being different, for not being what everyone else calls normal, and that eventually we can all love each other for who we are. With all that said, I hope I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all those other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.